I sat down at the wrong table. My actual blind date was somewhere else in that restaurant, probably wondering where I was. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I'd walked in nervous, spotted a woman alone at a table who matched the vague description I'd been given, and sat down across from a total stranger. She looked up at me, studied my face for a long moment, and said, "Your eyes are begging to stay. Sit down properly then. I won't tell if you don't." I had no idea, in that moment, that her actual date was the son of the biggest client at my company, and that within an hour, I was going to have to choose between walking away clean or risking both our careers over a mistake neither of us had corrected. I need to back up and explain how I ended up at that restaurant at all, because the mix-up makes more sense with context. My coworker Denise had been trying to set me up for months, insisting she knew the perfect person for me. A friend of a friend she described only in the vaguest possible terms. Dark hair, works in publishing, you'll know her when you see her. I'd resisted for a while, mostly out of the general exhaustion of dating after a long relationship had ended the previous year. But Denise was relentless, and eventually I agreed, mostly to get her to stop bringing it up in every single team meeting. I remember the specific dread of that Thursday afternoon leading up to the date, the way small, ordinary tasks at work kept getting interrupted by a nagging awareness that I had, in a few hours, agreed to sit across from a total stranger and perform the specific vulnerability of trying to be interesting to someone I'd never met. I'd been on exactly 2 dates since my last relationship ended, both forgettable in different ways, and I'd started to wonder whether I'd simply lost whatever instinct made that kind of connection feel natural, instead of like an exam I hadn't studied for. The restaurant was a mid-size Italian place downtown, moderately busy on a Thursday evening, the kind of place with enough ambient noise to make first date small talk feel less excruciating than total silence would. I arrived 7 minutes late, having gotten stuck behind an accident on the drive over, already anxious about starting the date on a bad note. I scanned the restaurant quickly, looking for a woman matching Denise's description, and spotted someone at a table near the window, dark hair, alone, checking her phone with the specific posture of someone waiting for a date who was running late. It matched well enough. I walked over, feeling the specific, low-grade panic of being late to something important, and sat down across from her without much ceremony. "Sorry I'm late," I said. "Traffic was a nightmare." She looked up from her phone, and I watched her face do something complicated, confusion, then a flicker of something almost amused, before settling into a careful, curious expression. "You're not who I was expecting," she said, "but you're welcome to stay anyway, if you'd like." I felt my stomach drop, as the reality of the situation caught up with me. "I think I've made a mistake," I said. "I'm so sorry. I'm supposed to be meeting someone for a blind date, and I think I've sat down at the wrong table." "You have," she confirmed, an eyebrow raised, clearly enjoying the situation more than the awkwardness of it probably warranted. She glanced briefly around the restaurant, as if double-checking there wasn't some other explanation available, before settling her attention back on me, with an expression I couldn't quite categorize yet. Amused, certainly, but also curious in a way that felt more genuine than polite. "I'm also on a blind date, waiting for someone who isn't you." I started to stand, mortified, already composing an apology, when she reached out and touched my hand lightly, stopping me. "Wait," she said, "before you go. I've been sitting here for 15 minutes, and my actual date is now running 20 minutes late without so much as a text explaining why. You seem significantly more interesting than the last 15 minutes of my evening have been. Sit down properly then. I won't tell if you don't." I hesitated, genuinely unsure of the etiquette here, before some part of me, curiosity, or maybe just the specific pull of her direct, unbothered confidence, made the decision for me. I sat back down, setting my jacket over the back of the chair like I'd meant to stay all along. Some small performance of ease I didn't entirely feel yet, but wanted to project regardless. "For the record," she added, "this is the strangest thing that's happened to me on a first date, and I've been on some genuinely strange first dates. I feel like that's worth acknowledging before we continue." "Duly acknowledged," I said. "For what it's worth, this is also the strangest thing that's happened to me on a first date, and I include in that comparison a date who once brought her emotional support parrot to dinner." "That's a high bar," she said, laughing. "I don't think I can compete with a parrot." "You're doing fine so far," I said, and meant it more than the light, joking tone of the exchange really let on. "I'm Sophia," she said, extending a hand across the table. "Marcus," I said, shaking it, feeling the strange, giddy absurdity of introducing myself properly to someone I'd already been sitting with for several minutes. There was a beat of silence after the introductions, both of us seeming to register simultaneously how strange the whole situation actually was, before we both started laughing at roughly the same moment. The specific shared laughter of two people acknowledging an absurdity neither quite has words for yet. It broke whatever remaining tension existed, and the conversation that followed felt looser, easier, freed from the specific formality that usually governs a first meeting between strangers. We fell into conversation almost immediately. Easy in a way, first dates rarely are, both of us aware of the specific comedy of the situation, adding a layer of charm neither of our actual, correctly matched dates would have provided. She worked in corporate communications, she told me, currently navigating a demanding but interesting role at a firm that handled PR for several major regional companies. I told her about my own job in logistics, the same mid-sized company where Denise had spent months orchestrating this entire disaster of an evening. We talked about the specific absurdity of blind dates in general, trading stories of previous disasters. A date of mine that had spent the entire dinner talking exclusively about his fantasy football league. A date of hers that had shown up 40 minutes late without an apology and then complained about the restaurant's wine list for the remainder of the meal. Somewhere in the middle of comparing our worst date stories, I realized I'd stopped feeling nervous entirely, the specific performance anxiety of a first date replaced by something that felt, strangely, like talking to someone I'd known for years rather than minutes. At one point, mid-conversation, she glanced toward the restaurant entrance, something flickering across her face that I couldn't quite read. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said, a little too quickly. "Just checking if my actual date has finally decided to show up." We'd been talking for almost 40 minutes, the conversation stretching easily past the point where either of us should reasonably have still been waiting for our actual dates, when a man approached our table, visibly flustered, phone in hand. I remember, in the minutes just before Julian arrived, Sophia had been telling me about a disastrous work trip to a conference in Chicago, animated in a way that made the whole restaurant around us seem to fade into background noise, and I'd found myself thinking, with a specific clarity that surprised me, that I hoped whoever her actual date turned out to be would somehow not show up at all, so this conversation could simply keep going uninterrupted. It was a strange, slightly guilty thought to have about a stranger's evening, but it was there nonetheless, honest and a little embarrassing in retrospect. "Sophia, I am so sorry," he said, sliding into the empty chair beside her without waiting for an invitation. "My father's dinner ran long. I couldn't get away." I watched Sophia's expression shift instantly into something careful, composed, entirely different from the easy warmth she'd shown me for the past 40 minutes. "Marcus, this is Julian," she said, and I noticed the specific, deliberate way she kept her tone light, professional, giving nothing away. "Julian, this is Marcus. There was a bit of a mix-up with the tables tonight." Julian looked between us, clearly confused, dressed in the kind of expensive, understated way that signaled money without needing to announce it directly, and I offered some version of an apologetic explanation about sitting at the wrong table, watching him process the information with a mix of embarrassment and something else I couldn't quite name yet. "I should let you two catch up," I said, starting to stand, understanding the situation had now resolved itself into its correct configuration, however awkwardly. "Actually," Sophia said quickly, "would you mind joining us? It seems silly to end an interesting conversation just because the seating got sorted out." I caught something in her eyes as she said it, not quite panic, but something adjacent to it, a specific, careful calculation happening behind her composed expression. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity about what was actually going on beneath the surface of that request. Dinner with all three of us proceeded, stilted and strange, Julian doing most of the talking, discussing his family's business with the kind of easy confidence of someone used to being the most important person in any room. It was during a lull in his monologue about a recent acquisition that Sophia excused herself to the restroom, catching my eye briefly on her way, a silent signal I didn't fully understand until she texted me from the bathroom 2 minutes later, her number having somehow ended up in my phone sometime during our earlier conversation, without me fully registering when. Julian's father is Whitmore Holdings, biggest client my firm has. I have to be careful how I handle tonight. If I embarrass him or his son publicly, it could genuinely cost my company the account. I stared at that text, understanding suddenly the weight of what I'd accidentally wandered into. Sophia returned from the restroom composed, professional, giving nothing away to Julian about the message she'd just sent me, and dinner continued with the same stilted three-way dynamic, Julian oblivious to the tension actually running underneath the surface of the table. I found myself watching Sophia navigate the evening with a kind of careful skill I hadn't expected, deflecting Julian's more overbearing comments with practiced diplomacy, keeping the conversation moving without ever giving him a clear opening to make the date feel more genuinely romantic, all while maintaining an outward appearance of pleasant, professional warmth that told me exactly how much practice she'd had at this specific kind of high-stakes social navigation. Julian talked at length about a recent acquisition his family's company had made, a lengthy, self-satisfied monologue that Sophia nodded along to with practiced attentiveness, occasionally asking a follow-up question precisely calibrated to keep him talking, without requiring much genuine engagement from her in return. I recognized, watching her, the specific professional skill of someone who'd spent years learning to manage difficult personalities without ever letting the effort show on the surface. The same skill, I imagined, that probably made her genuinely excellent at her job, deployed here in service of getting through an excruciating evening intact. At one point, Julian excused himself to take a call, and the moment he was out of earshot, Sophia's composed expression cracked slightly, exhaustion visible underneath it for just a second. "I'm sorry about all this," she said. "This wasn't remotely how tonight was supposed to go." "Can I ask what's actually happening?" I said. "You seem like you're managing something a lot more complicated than an awkward blind date." She was quiet for a moment, glancing toward the direction Julian had disappeared. "My firm handles PR for Whitmore Holdings. It's our biggest account by a significant margin. My boss set this date up specifically because Julian's father mentioned, offhand, that his son was single, and my boss thought it would be good for client relations if I happened to be interested. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. But I also can't afford to publicly reject the client's son in a way that reads as rude or dismissive, because that's the kind of thing that gets back to his father, and his father is the kind of client who takes things like that personally enough to threaten a contract renewal over it. That's an insane amount of pressure to put on a first date," I said. "Welcome to my actual job," she said, a tired, wry smile crossing her face. "I've spent my entire career learning how to manage relationships that have nothing to do with genuine connection and everything to do with keeping powerful people comfortable enough not to pull their business elsewhere. Tonight is just an unusually literal example of the general pattern." Julian returned from his call, and dinner limped toward its conclusion, Sophia maintaining her careful diplomacy throughout, me watching from a strange, complicated vantage point I hadn't anticipated occupying that evening. Near the end of the meal, Julian, apparently emboldened by wine and his own confidence, asked Sophia directly if she'd like to get dinner again sometime, just the two of them, framing it in a way that made clear he considered tonight's mix-up a minor footnote rather than a genuine complication. I watched Sophia hesitate, the careful diplomatic mask flickering, clearly weighing an answer that would satisfy the professional stakes against an answer that reflected what she actually wanted. I could see, in that brief hesitation, the entire calculation running behind her eyes. The account, her managing partner's expectations, the specific, unfair weight of a decision that should have been simple but wasn't, given everything riding on it. "Julian," she said, finally, "I think you're a genuinely nice person, and I don't want tonight's confusion to reflect poorly on you at all. But I don't think I'm the right fit for what you're looking for, and I'd rather be honest about that now than let this drag into something that isn't fair to either of us." Julian's expression shifted, something defensive crossing it briefly before he managed to smooth it back into polite composure. "I understand," he said, though his tone suggested he understood considerably less graciously than his words implied. "I hope this doesn't need to be complicated, professionally, I mean." "It doesn't need to be," Sophia said, carefully, "as long as we can both agree that a personal mismatch doesn't have any bearing on the actual working relationship between our companies." Julian left shortly after that, the dinner concluding on a note of careful, unresolved tension that I could tell was weighing on Sophia considerably more than she was letting show. He shook my hand on his way out, a brief, tight gesture that told me exactly how he actually felt about the evening, regardless of the polite words he'd used moments earlier. Once he'd gone, she turned to me, something vulnerable crossing her expression for the first time all evening. "I have no idea if I just made a huge professional mistake," she said. "I have no idea if he's going to go home and complain to his father about being rejected. And I have no idea what that complaint might cost my firm, or my job specifically if it does." "For what it's worth," I said, "you didn't do anything wrong. You were honest, and you were kind about it. If that costs you professionally, That's a reflection of how unreasonable the stakes were to begin with, not anything you actually did. I'd like to believe that, she said. I think I'm going to spend the next several weeks finding out whether the world actually agrees with you. We stayed at that table for another hour after Julian left, the restaurant slowly emptying around us, neither of us quite ready to end the evening, despite how genuinely strange and exhausting the middle portion of it had been. Sophia ordered dessert, insisting we'd earned it after surviving Julian's monologue about supply chain acquisitions. And we ended up sharing a tiramisu neither of us finished, too absorbed in conversation to pay it much attention. Can I ask you something? She said, somewhere near the end of that hour. And you can tell me if it's too forward given the circumstances. Would you want to actually do this again? Properly, I mean. As an actual date, not an accident. I'd like that a lot, I said. Though I should warn you, I'm significantly better at showing up to the correct table when I know in advance which one I'm supposed to be at. She laughed, the same unguarded laugh I'd been hearing on and off all evening, and I remember thinking, walking her to her car afterward, that whatever came next, however complicated the Whitmore situation eventually became, I was genuinely glad I'd sat down at the wrong table that night, regardless of what it cost either of us to sort out afterward. The following week, the fallout Sophia had feared arrived, though not in the exact shape either of us expected. Julian's father called Sophia's firm's managing partner directly, not to complain about the rejection itself, but to express confusion and mild irritation about the unprofessional mix-up at the dinner. The fact that a strange man had apparently been present for at least part of what was supposed to be a private introduction between his son and Sophia, a detail Julian had apparently relayed with more embellishment and irritation than the actual evening had warranted. Sophia called me the moment she got out of that meeting, her voice tight with a controlled kind of panic I hadn't heard from her before. My managing partner wants a full account of what happened, she said. He's treating this like it's a genuine crisis, not an awkward dinner. I think Julian may have told his father a version of events that makes it sound like I brought a date to sabotage the whole thing, rather than what actually happened. That's not remotely fair, I said. Fair has very little to do with client relationships at this level, she said. I need you to understand that. My managing partner doesn't care what's fair. He cares whether Whitmore Holdings is happy enough to keep paying us 7 figures a year, and right now, apparently, they're not entirely happy. Sophia was called into her managing partner's office the following morning, and she relayed the conversation to me afterward, still visibly shaken by it. He wanted to know who you were, she told me. Wanted to know if I'd brought a date to what was supposed to be a set-up dinner with a client's son, which, framed that way, makes me sound wildly unprofessional, even though that's not remotely what actually happened. What did you tell him? I asked. The truth, she said, that there'd been a genuine seating mix-up at the restaurant, that you'd sat down by accident, and that I'd invited you to stay because leaving would have been ruder than letting the awkward situation play out naturally. I told him I made a judgment call in the moment, and I stand by it. Did he accept that? He said he'd take it under advisement, she said, which in corporate speak usually means he's deciding whether this is worth pursuing further or letting go. I won't know for certain for a while, probably not until the account comes up for renewal in a few months, whether tonight actually cost me anything real. He also made a point of reminding me, rather pointedly, that I represent the firm at all times, even at what's ostensibly a personal dinner arranged through a client connection. I understood the subtext clearly enough. This wasn't really about you specifically. It was about reminding me how thin the line is, in this job, between my personal life and my professional standing. I felt a specific, uncomfortable guilt hearing that, understanding that my accidental mistake at a restaurant table had potentially put her actual career at risk, regardless of how unfair the underlying dynamic was that made a personal rejection carry professional consequences at all. I'm sorry, I said, if I hadn't sat down at your table. Don't, she said, cutting me off, more firmly than I expected. Don't apologize for something that turned out to be the best part of an otherwise miserable evening. I'm not going to let a system that punishes women for turning down men politely make me regret the one good thing that came out of tonight. We kept seeing each other after that first night, cautiously at first, both of us aware of the strange, complicated shadow the Whitmore situation cast over what had otherwise been an easy, genuine connection. Sophia's managing partner never took formal action against her, though she described the following months as carrying a specific, low-grade tension, an awareness that her performance and client relationships were being watched slightly more closely than before, an unspoken consequence of a situation she hadn't actually done anything wrong to create. She told me about small, telling moments during that stretch, being left off a client call she would normally have been included on, a comment from a colleague about keeping things professional that carried more weight than the words alone suggested, the general sense of operating under a microscope for a mistake that had never actually been hers. We navigated the early months of actually dating carefully, working around the specific awkwardness of having met the way we had, both of us occasionally still laughing about the sheer absurdity of it. A wrong table, a mistaken identity, an entire complicated professional crisis, born out of simple, human confusion about which woman with dark hair was actually waiting for which date. There was a stretch, around the 2-month mark, where Sophia suggested, half seriously, that maybe we should keep things quiet for a while longer, not tell anyone at her firm we were together, in case it somehow reignited the Whitmore situation, before enough time had passed for it to fully fade from anyone's memory. I understood the caution, even as it stung a little to feel like our relationship needed to exist partly in the shadows because of a mistake that hadn't been either of our faults to begin with. That tension came to a head one evening when a colleague of Sophia's spotted us together at a farmer's market, entirely by coincidence, and Sophia's reaction, a quick, instinctive step back, a subtle shift in how she introduced me, careful and vague in a way that felt, in the moment, like a small rejection even though I understood intellectually it wasn't meant as one, left me quieter than usual for the rest of that afternoon. "You went cold back there," Sophia said, once we were alone again, clearly having noticed. "I did," I admitted. "I know why you did what you did. I just don't love feeling like something to be managed, even temporarily, even for good reasons." She was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "That's fair," she said. "I think I've gotten so used to compartmentalizing my personal life to protect my career that I forget it has a cost on the other side too. On you, on us. I don't want to keep doing that indefinitely. I just need a little more time before I'm ready to stop being careful entirely. I hate that we have to think about this at all," I told her one night, later that same week. "I hate that something as simple as two people liking each other has to be managed like a liability." "I hate it too," she said, "but I've learned, the hard way, that hating an unfair system doesn't make it stop being the system I have to operate inside of. At least for now. I'm hoping that changes eventually. I'm not willing to bet my career on it changing quickly enough to matter for the Whitmore renewal." We found, over the following weeks, a version of that balance that worked better for both of us. She stopped hiding the relationship entirely, introducing me more naturally to colleagues when the moment arose, while I tried to be more patient with the specific, professional caution she carried into every part of her life, not just the parts that involved me. About 4 months in, Sophia told me the Whitmore account had, in fact, come up for a contract renewal discussion, and her firm had successfully retained it. The whole incident from that dinner apparently either forgotten or deemed insignificant enough not to factor into the actual business decision. She called me the moment she found out, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in weeks. "They renewed for another 3 years," she said. "My managing partner actually thanked me for how I handled the whole situation, if you can believe that. Apparently Julian's father mentioned, in passing, that he respected how professionally I'd handled an awkward personal matter, which I'm choosing to interpret as quiet vindication, rather than dwelling on how close it apparently came to going the other way. I think I spent months being more scared of that outcome than I needed to be," she told me, relief evident in her voice when she relayed the news. "I think that's its own kind of lesson, honestly, how much unnecessary fear gets attached to situations that, in the end, resolve themselves according to actual merit, rather than the worst-case scenario you'd convinced yourself was inevitable. Are you glad, in hindsight," I asked, "that you turned Julian down that night, given everything it put you through?" She didn't hesitate. "Completely glad," she said, "even with the months of uncertainty. I think the alternative, pretending to be interested in someone I wasn't, just to protect a client relationship, would have cost me something a lot more important than an account renewal. I don't think I'd have liked who I became if I'd made that trade." I should mention, somewhere in all of this, what happened to my own actual blind date, the one I'd missed entirely by sitting down at the wrong table in the first place. Denise found out, eventually, exactly what had happened, and her reaction was a specific mixture of horror and delight that I found genuinely entertaining once enough time had passed for it to be funny rather than mortifying. "You stood up, my friend," she said, the first time she confronted me about it at work, arms crossed, doing her best impression of genuine outrage despite the smile she was clearly fighting to suppress. "To accidentally fall in love with a total stranger at the wrong table." "I didn't stand her up on purpose," I said. "It was a genuine mistake." "She waited 45 minutes, Denise said, though her expression suggested she was more amused than actually upset. 45 minutes, checking her phone, wondering if you were going to show up at all, before she finally left. She's fine, for the record. She matched with someone else a week later, and seems perfectly happy. But you owe me an explanation for how this became, she gestured vaguely, encompassing the general situation. Whatever this now is. I told her the whole story, start to finish. The mistaken table, Sophia's initial confusion, the surreal three-way dinner with Julian, the professional stakes neither of us had anticipated, and watched her expression shift from indignant to something closer to delighted disbelief by the time I finished. So let me get this straight, she said, once I'd finished. You went on a blind date I spent 3 months setting up, missed it entirely, sat down at a stranger's table by accident, sat through an excruciating 3-person dinner with a client's son, and ended up meeting someone completely unrelated who you're now actually dating. Seriously, months later, despite an entire corporate crisis that almost cost her job in the process. That's roughly correct, I said. I'm never setting you up with anyone again, she said, though she was laughing by the end of the sentence, wiping actual tears from the corner of her eye. Clearly you don't need my help. Apparently you just need to sit at the wrong table and let chaos handle the rest. She met Sophia a few weeks later at an office happy hour I'd nervously arranged, and the two of them got along immediately, trading their own versions of the story with an enthusiasm that told me this particular piece of office lore was going to follow me for a very long time. He looked so panicked when he sat down, Sophia told Denise, clearly enjoying herself. I almost said something immediately, but he had this specific, hopeful desperation about him that I found genuinely charming, so I decided to let the mistake run its course a little longer. I still can't believe you didn't correct him within the first 30 seconds, Denise said, laughing. I'd have said something the second he sat down. Honestly, so would I, normally, Sophia said. I think I was just having a bad enough night already that a strange man accidentally sitting at my table felt like an improvement rather than an inconvenience. The two of them stayed in touch after that, occasionally meeting for coffee independent of me entirely, which I found both slightly alarming and genuinely touching. The sense that this whole strange chain of events had produced not just a relationship, but an entire small network of people who now shared this one absurd specific story as a kind of connective tissue between them. It's been almost 2 years since that Thursday night at the Italian restaurant downtown, the wrong table, the mistaken identity, the specific absurd chain of events that somehow led to the most significant relationship of my life. Sophia and I moved in together about 8 months ago, and we still, on the anniversary of that first accidental meeting, go back to that same restaurant, request the same table by the window if it's available, and order roughly the same meal we ordered that first strange, complicated night. It's become our own private tradition, a way of honoring the specific ridiculousness of how we actually found each other. Last year, the waiter who'd served us that first night happened to still be working there, and when we explained why we kept requesting that exact table, he laughed so hard he had to lean against the wall, telling us we'd made his entire week. Julian, as far as either of us knows, moved on entirely, married someone else about a year after that dinner, according to an announcement Sophia happened to see through a mutual professional connection. She told me she felt a small, quiet relief seeing that announcement, a sense that whatever awkwardness had existed between them had genuinely resolved itself with time, exactly the way she'd hoped it eventually would. The Whitmore account remains with Sophia's firm, the entire incident having faded, exactly as she'd hoped, into professional irrelevance over time. Sophia was promoted about a year after all of it, a fact she likes to note with a specific, satisfied irony. The same firm that had once treated her personal judgment as a professional liability eventually recognized her as one of their most valuable people. The same skills that had gotten her through that impossible dinner, ultimately becoming the foundation of her advancement. I remember the night she got the promotion news, calling me from her office, still processing it. My managing partner said something interesting today, she told me. He said the way I'd handled the Whitmore situation, staying composed under pressure, protecting the account while still being honest about what I wanted personally, was actually a case study he'd started using with newer associates. The same night I thought had potentially ended my career became, apparently, an example of good judgment under pressure. I don't know whether to laugh or be furious about how differently that same night could have been remembered if it had gone even slightly worse. Maybe a little of both, I said. Probably, she agreed. Mostly I'm just relieved. And a little amused that the worst night of my professional life turned into the best career story I have. I think about that mistaken table often, how close I came to realizing my error immediately and simply apologizing my way out of the situation before any real conversation had a chance to happen. I think about the specific, split-second decision Sophia made, watching a stranger sit down across from her, to invite the mistake to continue rather than correcting it immediately. I've asked her, more than once, what made her decide, in that instant, to let me stay rather than simply pointing out my error. "You looked so nervous and so hopeful at the same time," she told me once, "like you badly wanted to be somewhere you weren't sure you were allowed to be." I recognize that feeling. Actually, I think most of us have felt exactly that, wanting to stay somewhere before we've been given explicit permission to. I decided, in about 2 seconds, that I'd rather give you the permission than watch you leave. I've thought a lot, too, about the months of professional uncertainty that followed that first dinner, about how unfair it was that a simple, honest rejection carried the weight it did, purely because of who Julian happened to be related to. I don't think that unfairness ever fully resolved itself in some clean, satisfying way. Sophia still operates, to this day, in an industry where personal decisions get weighed against client relationships more than they probably should. What changed wasn't the system. What changed was that she made the harder, honest choice anyway and refused to let the fear of consequences talk her into becoming someone she didn't want to be. I asked her recently, half joking, whether she'd ever considered what might have happened if she'd simply pointed out my mistake immediately, that first night, instead of inviting me to stay. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "I think you'd have apologized, found your actual date somewhere else in the restaurant, and I'd have sat through an excruciating dinner with Julian alone, probably feeling significantly more trapped without anyone else at the table to make the whole situation feel survivable. I don't know if I'd have found the courage to turn him down as cleanly without having already spent 40 minutes remembering what an actual, easy connection felt like. In a strange way, I think you being there by accident might have been exactly what gave me the confidence to be honest with him at all." "So the mix-up actually helped," I said. "The mix-up," she said, "turned out to be the best thing that happened to me that entire year, professionally and personally both, even though it took several very stressful months to fully understand that." If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's that some of the most important connections in life arrive disguised as simple mistakes: a wrong table, a mixed-up name, a moment of confusion that could have ended in an easy, forgettable apology instead of becoming the beginning of everything that actually mattered. I sat down at the wrong table on a Thursday night, fully intending to apologize and leave. I'm endlessly grateful someone looked at me, recognized something worth keeping, and simply said, "Sit down properly then." If this one got you, tell me in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, subscribe. There's a new one waiting for you every week.